Hello, ladies and gentlemen, I am Admiral Ellis, and welcome to episode number... 1 second, please. 103 of Under Construction. This week, we are largely going to be looking at shoring up the areas around where we worked on last time, because we did a lot of tree pasting, some of which I had to do again, because the game did crash, which should surprise nobody. But here we are, a week later or so, and we have to continue where we left off. So, if we're going to be working in the same direction we were working in, that means we're going to be working from north to south. That means this area is the most important area right now. Also, these trees, they do look really cool where they are, but I need to push them back at least a little bit. It does make for a real shady looking, secluded, like shady in a good way, little waterfall area almost. But this is one of those spots where I don't really expect too many people to be keeping a close eye on, because honestly, why would you? You know, you can see it from up there on the bridge. We can see the bridge from here, but that doesn't necessarily mean you'll be staring off in this direction for long periods of time. We need to find out what we used for the bottoms of rivers previous. For example, here in RJ Canyon, I want this ballast looking stuff to use, just so that we're consistent. Despite having such a massive route, it does pay to keep numbers of assets down. It's just one less thing that'll stress the game out, as if we don't have enough of those. Or rather, we do absolutely have enough of those. That's why it's important to keep the asset count down. Like, unique asset count. That way, I mean, the game has to load fewer individual things, or fewer types of things, I guess. The user has to deal with fewer dependencies that could break. And also the game just has to download fewer dependencies when you actually download the route. I recently downloaded a ton of stuff, and this, of course, as you probably remember from last episode, came back to bite me just a little bit. Where I accidentally downloaded the Transitalia Rollins Pass route, which is cool. Like, it is really cool. I really didn't want it, because it's a lot of assets that I cannot use because they are not on the download station. That said, there are a lot of assets that were third-party that are now on the download station that I can use. I just need to suss out which ones those are, which is why I have a content manager window open in the background. Because, of course, the little number colors don't work anymore. If anybody has 2019 and they can tell me whether the QID display works anymore, that'd be cool to know. I somehow doubt it does, but at the same time I would not be surprised if that sort of thing just sort of popped back to life in Trains 2019. So we're just gonna get this sort of rocky stuff right up to here, I think. And we'll worry about something different for the lake itself. I also might want to go back and grab textures that were in the Deer Run, because those would be a good example to use. I'm not sure if I want to go into as much detail as we did when we were working on that little river, but, I mean, it could be worth it. It could be. Now, the important thing I want to look at real quick is, also, this is missing, I think it's missing a tile of water. Or maybe this is just sloped and... No, it's definitely missing a tile of water. Hold on, let's see if we can fix that. Nope. That wasn't good. Nope. That also wasn't good. There we go. Alright. That's fixed. Okay, yeah. Neither of those pillars are in the water, which sort of lends a little bit to the idea that that bridge has survived. Now, the VMR, and a lot of this I had started sussing out while I was working on the Everett Lake Railroad description, because the Everett Lake does interact with, well, the VMR in a large part because the VMR takes it over, but a number of other railroads as well. The VMR came through in the 1890s. Depends on the area, because it did take them a little bit of time to get across the whole peninsula. But that's what they were to do. Before them, there was no single railroad that linked north and south, and if you've heard me talking about a variety of different things, there was basically no railroad that linked north to south. I mean, aside from the swamp, which was in itself an obstacle. Also, hold on. I think my settings are up high. No, it's still on 3000. Okay. The swamp was an obstacle, but also the cove on the on the south side of the peninsula, we're a long way off from getting to that, so don't worry about even thinking about it. But it is something to consider, because it did get in the way in a significant way. Let's see, hold on. Ashbury Ranch. I want what I used under this lake here. D-Textura 6. Whoa, I'm underwater. Okay. So I've got this texture, I grabbed it, we're going to take it over here. So we have this, which will take you down to here. I'm just trying to make sure our road network is complete. Or at least as complete as it ought to be. Let's see, we have a road that goes up this way, that makes sense. Yeah, so we do have this guy. He lets drivers go that way. And then we have the highway that goes up there. I'm trying to keep track of where the roads should go on my Tolbrand Plus map, which every time I say that, people think I'm making the map bigger, which I'm really not. I am using a revised and updated version of the original map that I drew for the railroad to, well, A, figure out history, and B, also figure out what is just in the outside of the peninsula that I'm supposed to be connecting to. You know, where are the major industries that we don't have? And also, where are the major industries, period? Because the idea that I had for Tolbrand was fairly loose, and it was one of the least detailed maps that I'd ever made. Especially relative to its size. It was an order of magnitude larger than most things I'd drawn before. So, with that in mind, I had to spend a lot of time thinking about what do I do with Tolbrand now that I'm working on it. You know, now that it's not just a pie-in-the-sky idea, I'm actually building this route, this map, that's supposed to be basically real scale and is supposed to have real long distances between towns. What am I going to do with it? You know, how do I turn this from something make-believe and totally fictitious to something that is realistic? Not real, of course, but realistic. And so that's when I started working on the Tolbrand Plus map, because I decided that, okay, so if I am to do this, I need to start working on other things outside of Tolbrand, outside of this microcosm in which we live and work. Whoops. I need to figure out the locale. You know, I need to understand where do the goods come from and where do they go to off map. Now, obviously, some of that's fairly straightforward. If we're going to have a seaport, it's pretty much going to ship everything out or everything in or, you know, whatever. The seaport is there to handle our overflow, mostly. And that's what I intend for it to do. But that's not necessarily everything that it can do. One of the things that I need to take care to pay attention to is the fact that, you know, in using our industries the way that we are, you know, in trying to balance out the towns and stuff like that, we sometimes produce a lot of something that we don't need a lot of. And I talked about this, you know, 40 cars of lumber, etc. I've talked about this in the past, but that is the crux of my issue right now, or one of them. So I'm making all this lumber, or I will be making all this lumber as soon as I get that AI done, which God knows when that's going to happen, but it's going to happen sooner or later. And it has to go somewhere, and so my current solution is to put it on a train that will take it over to Wombeck, which is one of the towns that consumes a lot of lumber. They have a lot of mills there that produce things like furniture and well, just other sorts of goods, whatever you can use lumber for. And so I sort of figured, well, that'd be a good use for them. And so now I need to actually make that happen. And currently the problem is just getting the darn getting things unloaded. Getting the trailers unloaded. That's the biggest issue for me right now. Now here's what I want to do. I actually want to grab, again, I want to go back to our first river, which is all the way over here. It's amazing how far we've come. Literally how far. And yeah, this is a lot more detail than I really would otherwise want to get into. It does look very good, but it isn't really what I'm trying to go for now. As much as I think this is pretty, the areas way out there are not the kind of areas that I'm going to dedicate that much time to. Oh man, just look at. We have to click multiple times to get across the map to where we're working. I haven't had to do that since we started working on the actual track work. And that's a long time ago now. So I think it's amazing that we've come as far as we have. I hope you guys have appreciated this, this ride that we've all been on. Speaking of rides, and I wanted to get to this, so I'm sure many of you may remember that I took a Lime scooter the other day, basically out of frustration, but also for the sake of content, because I figured I would talk about it. Now I've done something else, also sort of for the sake of content, and also sort of just because I could. And that is, I rode Little Roadie, which I'm going to wait, because Madison left the room. If she comes back, I'll talk about it again, or more, or whatever. But long story short, Little Roadie is a pilot project of semi-autonomous because they have a driver at the controls, and allegedly they have to control them maybe 20% of the time on a bad day. So other times it's doing better than that. But semi-autonomous bus service in downtown Providence. And by bus service, I mean glorified golf cart service, but really I think I'm going to skip over that part. These things are very small. Certainly very small for road-going vehicles, very, very small for public transit vehicles, but that doesn't stop them at all. In fact, they don't need to be stopped by that because they get stopped by basically everything. Nobody lets the damn things go, and the one I was in got sort of confused by something in the road and just stopped while I was trying to pull out from one of the bus stops. So, yeah, it actually is. It's not the easiest thing to tell when the driver has taken over from the automation, which at first I was like, well, well, that's kind of lame. You can never even tell if the automation's working. But I guess what that really means is that the automation itself is fairly seamless and very similar to human operation. So I started out sort of grumbling at that, and now I'm kind of impressed by it because, well, it can do that. If it can mimic a human to a degree where I don't know when the human is driving, that's pretty impressive, I think. So, yeah, I'll just sit back and be impressed by it, honestly. I don't necessarily need to complain about not knowing when it's being driven by a human and when it's not. So, yeah. And it didn't get me all the way home. It took me halfway home because that's its route. But it did drop me off at a place where I could catch another bus that got me fairly close to where I normally get off my bus. So, I mean, it's fun. It's fun to navigate public transit like that. And it's, I really did want to try this service out, this pilot service. Not only will it help with ridership and show that, yes, we do care about this stuff, but also now I can say I've been in a self-driving vehicle, and B, I have now seen what that's like, and I think it's really cool. It's funny that the guy driving me was also an Uber driver, and I didn't want to say anything about it, but I was just the whole time thinking, like, so what do you think about the robots taking your job? I did make one comment, it almost feels like it's kind of insensitive, as it were. But, hey, it is what it is. Progress marches on. This guy certainly got himself a sweet gig monitoring these things. So, I mean, not like we can all have that job, but he certainly has it. I think it's an upgrade. I wanted to ask him what's more stressful, and I honestly don't know what his answer would be. I would hope he would say the actual Uber driving, because that would mean that the automated car driving takes a load off. But at the same time, the automated car driving is almost like, as a parent, watching your kid learn to drive. And obviously the thing is not his baby by any means, but he is responsible for it. So maybe it's more like watching somebody else's kid learn to drive. And that might even be more hectic. Because I can only imagine how much trouble he'd be in if you let the thing get into an accident. He does have the power to overrule it, if it starts just doing bizarre stuff. Which, like I said, it did that once it, I guess, spotted something on the ground. One of the coolest things, though, is that the cameras on it are fairly limited. And you'd think that, well, it's an automated car, it needs to know where everything else is around it, it needs to read traffic signals and signs and striping and everything. Well, these things are designed to stick to a particular route. And that means it has the route already baked into it. It knows where the stop signs are. It doesn't need to look for them. It knows where the traffic signals are. It doesn't need to look for them. And by virtue of other technology, right? Other stuff that they've hooked up along the route, it knows what the color of traffic signals is without having to point a camera at them. Which is super cool to me, because I had never even considered that being an option. Now, because it is an option, now I'm interested if that is much closer to whatever the way forward is. Because, well, I mean, think about it. If you can integrate your traffic management center, or whatever, that monitors all the traffic signals already, with a set of automated vehicles to lessen the load on the individual vehicle, so they know when things are red and when things are green, then that is certainly a shortcut that I'm not sure I've heard anybody taking before. It's very clever, and I'm very impressed by this company. And Rhode Island is not the only place where they're doing these, but he said that my driver or attendant, or whatever you want to call him, he did say that this is the only place where they're using these in public transit service. Otherwise, they are in the service of employers with off-site parking, where the parking is some distance away. And one of the most heavily trafficked ones of these is in Detroit. So that's an interesting one. In Detroit and I think Grand Rapids. So clearly there's a presence in Michigan for these things. But this one is in our own biggest little state in the Union, and it is aptly named Little Roady, R-O-A-D-Y. And yeah, I was just excited. I got off my train, and the train had been held up just a little bit. Not anything significant, but we slowed down for what seemed like no reason, and that's always bad news. So, also, just to add to that fact, I think I know why we did. And I'll come back around to that. So I think I missed my normal 56 bus, because the connection is rather tight. If I walk out of the station, on an average day the bus is pulling up, or at least I can see it. So I don't have a lot of time to go, oh, my bus, and walk over to where the stop is. Although, there are usually enough people there that it stops the bus anyway, or or the bus driver stops, rather, assuming people are going to get on. Whether or not those people do, it usually gives me enough time to get over to the bus. Either way, my bus adventures aside, I think, I think I missed my bus because of the train being slightly delayed. So I went, alright, how about we take this thing? I think it'd be fun. I actually wasn't thinking about content when I did it, but now that I have done it, and now that I'm talking about it, obviously I'm thinking very much about the content of taking it. I talked the guy's ear off. I apologize for that. Not that he's ever going to see this, but it is the kind of thing where I was excited and I wanted to learn more about the technology and whatever. Especially because as a traffic engineer, I basically am going to have to contend with these things in probably a few years' time. A reminder to everyone who's skeptical of these things, it's not that they have to be perfect, they just have to be better than us. And to be better than us is not really all that difficult for a robot. Robots don't need sleep, they don't need rest even, they just need fuel or electricity. Or a little bit of both in the case of a autonomous car, although most autonomous cars are electric. Just to simplify them, I would assume. Less things to go wrong. Yeah, so I decided, I'll take this thing, so I took it. Meanwhile, things were kind of hectic in Providence both this afternoon and continuing on to this morning, because the main two tracks, that'd be tracks 1 and 2, were shut down. Not the tracks themselves, but the platforms were, and the reason is because the elevator was out of service, so in order to keep things handicap friendly, they decided to close down those two platforms, route all the trains onto tracks 3 and 5, which are the siding tracks, which, I mean, they're fully capable, but they just aren't used nearly as much. And also, the approaches to them on either side are kind of awkward, and I watched the dispatch board this morning. I just sort of stood at an angle where I could see behind the ticket counter, and I watched the dispatch board as they squeezed trains into there, mostly one after another instead of 2 by 2 as they typically go into the normal platforms. Especially when they're using the normal platforms and the sidings, which are also just regular platforms, but I'm calling them that for sake of conversation, I guess. Because they can use both of those on the average weekday for a commute, then today, or this morning, it was certainly a mess to get trains in there. Now, there was also a train parked on the freight track. It wasn't a freight train, it was an Amtrak train with one coach in the middle and one P42 on each end. So I don't know what that was doing there, but it's definitely not the first time I've seen it. I couldn't tell you what it is or what its purpose is. But it's there. It wasn't even parked at whatchamahoo's it? A station platform. I'm sure they could have just left it on one of the station tracks at this point, but they didn't. They decided to go with the leaving it on the freight track, which, if a freight train had to go through, which I assume one did, I guess they would have had to shift it over and send it onto either track 1 or 2 to get it through. It wouldn't be in anything's way, really, although the crossovers to get it there, actually, I'm not even sure if that's possible. I should have looked more closely at those switch diagrams. So I don't know how they did that. I don't know if they did that. I assume they had to, because the freight train runs through there at least once a day. But maybe not. Maybe it was just a lazy Friday, and so the Providence and Worcester didn't need to go down there. I don't know. I always do like Fridays, though, not just because they're Fridays, but because it means that there are a lot fewer people on the average commuter train. It really does make a difference. We do traffic counts typically on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. When I have to go out to do something, it's on one of those days almost guaranteed. Unless it's a weekend count, because sometimes we need weekend numbers. So, the reason we do that is because that's the days with the highest traffic, or at least when the traffic is most consistent. And I always thought, well, it can't be that different. You know, if the difference is mainly spurred on because people take vacations over the weekend, what percentage of the population is taking a vacation on the average weekend? And the answer is enough to significantly impact commuter train ridership. So, to give it the difference between a few seats left, or, really it'd be plenty of seats versus standing room only when we leave Back Bay. Very rarely will I opt for getting a seat upon leaving Back Bay, and that's before the last pickup stop. Before we leave the city of Boston proper. And, I mean, the reason for that isn't because there are no seats, but it is because basically the only seats left at that point are middle seats. And God, who wants one of those? But it does mean, by consequence, that you usually have to say, "Excuse me, can I get in there?" to somebody, and I'm not going to do that, because that means I have to talk to somebody, and I don't want to do that. So, I usually go in the back, and I, hypocritically, chit-chat with a few of the friends that I've made that also ride the train. And we tend to be on at the same time. They get out of work at a fairly consistent time. I kind of don't. But these days, I've been trying to minimize my time in Boston. So I can get home in a reasonable time, especially on today where I had to do this. It is Friday, by the way, when I'm filming this, if you didn't figure that out already. Yesterday was the culmination of several very long work days and then very long home days, and I was dirt tired. I was exhausted beyond exhausted. I could not continue. So I went, well, I'm just gonna go to sleep, and I slept for like 4 hours, and then I got up and I helped Jader with his physics homework because I really like physics, honestly, and then I played a bunch of War Thunder, and then I went back to sleep. So, that's my life. I am so grateful to have Madison because she just made dinner. She was like, "You're having dinner. You're eating something," and she just took it upon herself to make dinner. But she mostly takes it upon herself to make dinner anyway. But the thing is, this is not 1954. She's not my housewife. She doesn't just stick around to make me dinner. She has a job and everything, so
What?
I'm saying how you make me dinner because you're a good person, and not because you're my housewife.
I make you dinner because I want to.
That's my point. But that, isn't your only purpose in life, is what I'm saying. If it was
Sure?
If it was 19... Well, you go to work.
Yeah. Making you dinner and going to work are my only purposes in life.
Yeah, but the going to work part is unique compared to 50 years ago. That's the bit that's relatively new. That's the part I'm focusing on.
You know what's fun?
Not going to work?
Well, no, but that looks like a sidewalk.
Well,
The way the tile looks, it makes it look like a sidewalk.
that'd be a real big sidewalk. It's a
You
lot of...
narrowed it out a little bit. It looks like a sidewalk or a bunch of parking spaces.
Well, I have sidewalk and parking spaces. They aren't the gray grid. Get rid of the grid. The grid is just there for reference.
You want some cough syrup?
No, thank you.
AKA Moxie.
Yeah, I don't get it. I even, I maybe thought, well, maybe my tastes of Moxie have been, maybe I was wrong. So, I tried some, and it's good for, 2 seconds, and then terrible for 10 seconds. The aftertaste is awful, and it goes on forever.
I mean, maybe if you put it in ice, it would taste better, because it gets... Well, the ice gets rid of most of the carbonation, which isn't really there to begin with.
I'm not worried about the carbonation, I'm worried about the fact that it tastes awful.
Tastes good to me.
Yeah, well.
Do you want a burger?
I mean, I do in, an hour and a half. Yep, exactly an hour and a half. She said she was going to hang out with me. She lied. She could have been here. Oh well. We'll have to talk about sidewalk later. So, where was I? Talking about commuter rail problems. Today's episode of Ellis versus the MBTA. I saw one of the new Orange Line trains, though. I thought that was pretty cool. I have not seen one in service, despite the fact that I've seen many, many pictures of them, except today I walked out of Back Bay Station, walked over the bridge, and there one was, just trundling along underneath the bridge. Again, I was fairly surprised to see it, because I didn't think they had, I didn't think they were rolled out to the public yet, and I really didn't expect them to be running during rush hour if they weren't. But here we are. They were running. So look at this. We have this done. We're going to get the edge of the lake done and that means we'll be up to, well, somewhere in here where the road is. Also, we're missing a spot right there. I'll fix that later. And that means we're getting ever closer to Little Creek, which is the next sort of boundary line. I am going to try to get all the tree stuff in before almost anything else, which means I've got to get this area done. And move all the way up past here. I need to do that scenic work, that terrain work. I've got to move all the way up there. I have to, again, do everything. Basically up to Lionhead is where I want to stop, or maybe just shy of the lake here. And yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Anyway. And then we'll come down and we'll do stuff down here again. Unless, A, you guys want to see me do that, or B, I really get the inkling to do that. Maybe if I get tired of doing this. But doing that really isn't going to be that different. It's just going to be closer to the ocean. So, yeah. Let's keep it up. Anyway, we do have a comment, or, well, we have two. Broken Bob says, Ryan, why are you implicating me? And I don't know what that's about. Moyersport says, timestamping 1 hour and 2 minutes, is the yard full of rolling stock going to be included in the final version of the map? And I actually did notice that before I started recording, clicked on the timestamp because I wanted to know which yard he was talking about, or I was talking about at that point. And I was talking about the yard in Doberman. Now, due to the fact that Doberman has been disconnected from the rest of the world by rail since 1911 or so, and we're in 1951, or 53, I mean, or so, it would be a little bit out of the way for me to build Doberman. At current, Doberman is well outside of the area that I plan to build for the map, so short answer, no. I won't be including the Doberman Mining Museum in this route at all. If ever we decide to build beyond, if we ever were to build Tolbrent Plus, what I would start with is building out the Everett Lake main line and stuff like that. I would probably build... I'd think about when the rails in Tolbrent hit their peak. Yes?
I just want to light my candles. Is that my candles?
Oh,
I'm just gonna do it.
Okay, darn, I knew I was waiting for something. Oh well. Baruch Adonai Kosher. I said Baruch Adonai Kosher. Oh crap. Okay, so gotta continue with this. Yeah, I would have to consider again. The Everett Lake is the main one right now because by 1950, by the time we got there in the timeline, basically the only major main line to have been dismantled is the old Everett Lake, which is Sayre Pass, which is a good 100 miles of mountain railroading, at least. And yeah, I mean, it is kind of a shame that it's not going to be there anymore. It is also a shame that we're not building it, but boy, would that be a lot. Now, I was just talking about how me making the Tolbrent Plus map, which is where all of Sayre Pass came to be, does not mean I'm making Tolbrand itself any larger, any physically larger. It's getting more detail, and it's getting more spur lines and branch lines and stuff like that, but overall it's not getting bigger for the most part. So, it's not the kind of thing where that would have been part of the original route had I not decided to come up with it, basically. Underwater. So, if I were to go back and I mean, I would have to be building before 1911, I think. I think it was 1911. Which is when the washouts occurred and the Doberman branch was closed. You could almost equate it to the Churchill line, which was in the news in the last couple of years. Out of service due to severe washouts, etc., and then clawed its way back into service with the help of some prodding from the Canadian government to Omnitrax. And I believe it was actually turned over to a different operator, but that's neither here nor there. We're not talking about that. That's for the podcast. And it's been talked about on the podcast at length multiple times. So, anyway, you could imagine it like that, except the Doberman branch, while not being a cash cow per se, because the Everett Lake wasn't in the best position to be selling anthracite. They just kind of used the anthracite, and it's not like there was that much there, but there was enough. It wasn't absurd, and what I should probably build is other railroads that have tapped similar nearby veins from other directions, as I have done with the Columbia Reserves up in the Volga Mountains there. Out of control for a second. And so it wasn't crazy. It wasn't a cash cow, and it wasn't like the Everett Lake's revenue just bottomed out when they had those washouts happen. They were already in kind of a tight spot. The anthracite was helping, but again, they were the ones using most of it. Well, maybe not most of it, but they were using a lot of it because they had almost their entire fleet running on it. So, it did hurt them quite a bit, but it wasn't the end of the world because their world was already ending. By the time 1911 comes around, you can almost already see the writing on the wall for the Everett Lake. They're already in really deep trouble. They have lost their main trading partner, and now they suddenly have no more coal. And so they have to make a desperate agreement with another railroad, which is just frankly predatory on them, because they've got nowhere to turn. And the Doberman branch never gets rebuilt. So, the unfortunate thing is, if I were to build a 1905 era Tolbrand, perhaps, which would maybe be Tolbrand at its trackage peak, the Everett Lake would almost be left out. It would be there, but it really didn't have much to do with other railroads. Although, well, maybe, yeah, in 1905 it was kind of already, they were already in trouble. I just closed out the tab of the history, but I can assure you they were probably already in trouble by then. So, yeah, that's them. You have, see, in 1905, the Akron-Macon had just gotten taken over. The thing is, I would do one that's a little bit earlier. I would consider doing a slightly earlier date, but if you roll back the clock anymore, you don't have the tunnel under Alduin Pass. And if you don't have that, then suddenly operations from east to west get a lot more annoying. And a hell of a lot harder. I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing. If I wanted to do a turn of the century one, first of all, I think it'd be hard to find particularly the equipment for the Everett Lake, because all those massive camelbacks, including articulated camelbacks, not the easiest thing to get your hands on. But, for trains at least. To my knowledge. And then, just turn of the century equipment in general is tough. See, when you wind back the clock that far, you're suddenly outdating, or you're suddenly getting out of the operable date range of most of the mainstays of locomotive fleets. And I'm not even talking about Northerns. I'm meaning Mikados, I'm meaning Pacifics, I'm meaning Mountains, any of that stuff. If you go back that far, your biggest locomotives are probably consolidations and 10-wheelers. That's not a lot of things right there. That severely limits your ability to go up hills at any decent speed. So, yeah, that's mainly what I am concerned about when it comes to doing, if I were to ever, and I'm not saying I would, if I were to ever make a backdated Tolbrand route so that we can explore some of the other stuff. I could do sort of an alt history where the Sayre Pass is still open, but that would require some serious reorganization of facts. Well, facts, quote-unquote. I'm under no impressions that it's not a real railroad and Tolbrand is not a real place. But it is what it is. So, yeah. I like talking about the Everett Lake now because it is, now that I've finished its article, and I haven't finished or really started anybody else's, it is by far the most history-rich railroad on the peninsula. A lot of the other railroads, in fact, the Volga Mountains Railroad being the only one that retains its entire main line and never was, well, actually that's not true, because it did merge with the Everett Lake. I was going to say it hasn't merged with anybody. The Zion and Skyline was originally the Zion Eastern Railroad, and then it merged, or it reorganized, and it did, I believe, have a merger with the oh goodness, something like the South, it wasn't the South Shore, but it was a similar name to the South Shore. The Southport, I think, the Southport Railroad. So there was that. They merged together, I think, or they were competitors. Actually, no, it was the Southport Railroad, I think. Was that the... No, that was the predecessor of the Gilson Eastern. I need to sort that all out. But in the late 1800s, when you had the Volga Mountain Flyer, before the tunnel was built and everything, it would travel along the Everett Lake from Akron all the way to Skyline, where it would switch onto the Zion Eastern Railroad. And from there, it would travel down to the town of Zion, where it would then go on the Southport Railroad. So yeah, that was the predecessor to the southern half of the Gilson Eastern. The northern half being preceded by the Jefferson and Gilson Railroad, which pioneered the route over the swamp. It was the first railroad to build over the swamp. And you can still see some of the remnants from it in the bridges that I've scattered about. But... oh, I missed the middle of the lake, huh? Doesn't really matter that much. So, yeah, the Everett Lake has the richest history by far. The next thing that I tried to do was start a history document for the Valley Railroad, because I decided, I've gone big, let me go small. So, the smallest independent company that I could find, former independent company that I could find on Tolbrand, was the Valley Railroad. The other railroad that I could start with would be the New Shoreham Tramway, or at least, yeah, I could, like I said, I could start with it, not finish it certainly, because we're just not there yet. Because they did in fact start on the island of Meridian, serving the town of New Shoreham. If you're in the Discord, and so Motorsport, I believe you're in the Discord. A little while ago, I posted an updated Tolbrand Plus map, and you can see where Doberman is on that map. It is way out in the middle of nowhere, relatively speaking. It is, you would have to go down, 100 miles or so of raised track, maybe less than that, maybe it's like 40 miles or so, of raised and washed out track, or track that is at the very least listed as abandoned. Not necessarily abandoned, or well, not necessarily torn up for the portions that are, well, that were safe by being on the wrong side of the washouts. That tree is in the lake. There we go, that's better. Alright, there we go. Get the trees out of the lake. Have fun. Okay. Love you. Okay, back to what we were doing. She never hangs out with me. Cry. She's actually gotten into trouble in Terrace Town. If you want to talk about Madison's preferences with hanging out with me. So we've tried to start a Trouble in Terrace Town server, and we had a little bit of fun dicking around on it. Had some technical difficulties, as of course we do, but it's getting better. And hopefully we'll be able to play around with that sooner or later. So, yeah, let's fill this in. There we go. We're almost done getting around this whole lake and river. So that is good. That is a mark of progress right there. I'm only 45 minutes in to do some basic texturing around a lake. See, this is why I put this stuff off. It is tedious, beyond tedious. It's, it's not even that, like, creative, and it's not fast by any means. You're just doing the same sort of process over and over again. It's not fun. It is, to an extent. It's very zen, is what it is. But it's not the kind of thing where you go, oh, yeah, I can't wait to put mud next to this river and put grass in it for the 100th time. I can't imagine how many miles worth of grassy river we'll have made by the time Tolbrand is done. The thing that I'm really interested in is once we get into some other areas, what is this going to look like? What is it going to... What am I going to figure out for doing things like high desert? Or, even just Rocky Mountains-esque stuff. Because I don't have any experience doing that kind of stuff. I mean, I have some really basic experience doing Iron Horseman route things, but honestly, we never really even pretended that it was in the Cascades, or that it was supposed to look like the Cascades. It is... In reality, that's where it would be, but I wouldn't pass that off as the Cascades any day, and I don't think anyone else would be able to guess that. The only giveaway is that the water is on the west side. So, yeah. Come on. There we go. So, yeah, let's fill this thing in. Let's just get this done. Let's get this done, let's move on. We need to figure out where our road went, because it's buried under the trees somewhere. And then we need to mark it on the map, like Preston Garvey, and then we just need to, well, fill in the little gray areas around it, sort of like we're doing here, but sort of less annoying because there isn't water involved. And I'm not going to be placing any trees. I'll, of course, save that to the last half hour or so of the episode. It seems to be crashing pretty much right on cue. I do lose a few minutes of footage every time, but that isn't the worst thing that's ever happened to me. I don't even tend to lose that much progress, because Tane is fairly good at keeping an eye on what we've done. Honestly, if there's one thing that I can praise Tane for, it's that, aside from the interlocking towers. Speaking of AI commands, I recently, once again, got it in my head to start trying to AI Jader's route. I want to do it. I'm saying I want to do it. I've said it about 100 times that I want to do it. And I would love to come back to it and also use it as a teaching moment, because I'm sure lots of people really want to know how to do that kind of stuff, and there aren't too many good tutorials out there. Not saying that I necessarily go find tutorials when I'm having problems, because, frankly, tutorials take up way too much goddamn time. And I want an answer now, because I am a modern American and I cannot wait and I have no patience. So, I don't tend to look up tutorials. I tend to look up forum answers where I can read a few steps and get it. But this is not AutoCAD, this is trains. And I need to solve my own problems, too, with AI and helpers. Because further experimentation is necessary, but when you combine two trains that already have AI drivers on them, weird stuff happens. I'm not sure if there's a rhyme or reason yet. I haven't taken the time to figure it out. But I don't want to have to, honestly. I want to make it so that I never have to figure that out, and so that I never have an opportunity to combine two trains with drivers during the course of the average Tolbrin session. And by average, I mean the Tolbrin session, because I don't want there to be more than one, and I don't want there to be any variation whatsoever. The other thing is, with the idea of having a large staging yard instead of having the train stacker, where stuff just comes out of, stuff gets spit out of portals and then just goes together, I think commands could become a lot more consistent, even more consistent than they currently are. Because, well, right now, the issue is mainly that if portals are just churning stuff out, then I have to use a lot of, couple at track mark and stuff like that, and I cannot use basically any just regular couple at commands. Couple to commands. The reason being that on a second running, or, a second loop, I mean, if it makes it around all the 24 hours and comes back to 6 a.m., on the second running, the cars may not be the same cars. They may be very similar cars. And having the staging yard doesn't really make that any better, because there could be some cars going to different places, or blah blah blah. But what it does let me do, is do that for engines, because engines are much easier to keep track of, and I can have it be the exact same engines going onto these trains on a day-to-day basis. I don't know how easy that's going to be. I know that it's possible. Hopefully it becomes a fairly realistic thing to let happen. But right now, I just sort of have my fingers crossed. I'm thinking, well, if I can get it to work like that, or, if the idea of a massive staging yard is in fact feasible, then I can get it to work like that. And if I can get it to work like that, then maybe I can keep track of all my engines. And if I can keep track of all my engines, then maybe, just maybe, I'll be able to have the same engines do the same thing every day. That is my ultimate goal, because right now, the situation sort of calls for, well, it'll be the same kind of engines doing the same things every day, but it might be a different one, because that one is going to get sent into a portal at the end of the day and deleted. Or, sometime between now and 24 hours from now, it'll be deleted. And another identical locomotive is going to come out of the same portal. And it might be the same, but it might not be. The other thing that this lets me do that's really spectacular and cool is the idea that if I can make the staging yard work exactly the way I want it to, and that is that everything gets recycled perfectly, or as close as you can get. You know, there may be some cars that end up getting set out and then picked up the next day. Or, well, you know, that'd be basically all the cars, really, because you're not going to be set out and picked up in the same day most of the time. I think that what I can then do, is have these engines that we have, that we use. Oh god, what is that? Don't want that. That we use actually retain their numbers. And then, you know, therefore, I can make make a lot of these commands correspond to locomotive numbers. And I mean that. I don't mean like, you know, just an example, you know, K&L, G5, number 1, you know, whatever. Just whatever the default thing is. What I'm saying is, I think I can make them respond to the actual engine numbers that I've assigned them with respect to Tolbrand. And that is a breakthrough. Because that lets me do a lot of very cool and interesting stuff that otherwise would be pretty troublesome. Or, well, it wouldn't be that troublesome, but what I would have to do is just use a lot more couple of track mark commands, which right now I've been trying to get away from. Where did those come from?
My desk.
Why were they on your desk?
I don't know.
Go put them somewhere. What was I saying? Yeah, so I need to get away from the couple of track mark commands, largely because I'm running out of track marks. Not like I am in imminent danger of running out of track marks, but based on my calculations, I am gonna fill up the number of track mark. Like, when you open the track mark window, it gives you, like, your alphabetical, not the list of track marks, but your alphabetical breakdown of track marks, as in, these are the ones that start with A, these are the ones that start with B, these are the ones that start with C, etc. If you have more than one column's worth of each of those, which has happened before, or it does happen currently, then it just overflows. You have 2 columns of A's, 2 columns of B's, 2 columns of C's. But if that list of columns, almost, if that goes beyond the height of the screen, there is no way to get to the other ones. If you like, if you fill up that list, like, fully and completely, there is no way to get to the other ones. And I installed another thing, another couple at track mark command that gives it another set of breakdowns, but it isn't as helpful. It isn't quite as good as just giving me another whole set of, well, breakdowns. It's a small set. It's like, it breaks it down into quadrants, you know, like A through whatever, and then J through, you know, A through J, J through whatever, that sort of thing. It's less than perfect. It is not bad. I mean, it's very helpful, because it really does let me have a little bit more wiggle room with the amount of track marks that I'm using. But I really, really wish, well, I just wish there was a scroll bar. That would solve the problem pretty easily, I think. I saw something about it on the forums, and I read the post, and it was something like, well, we don't want people to go overboard with track marks, was the official N3V response. I think that's developer speak for we don't really want to make there be more stuff, because that's a fairly flimsy answer. If you can handle more track marks, you should be able to put more track marks. Don't save me from myself, N3V. Let me wallow in my own misery after I've created 10,000 track marks and need to sift through the list of ones that I haven't renamed yet to find this one. When you have 5 individual list columns of things that start with T, you're in trouble. You have a problem. But, yeah. Anyway, so I'm thinking about a lot of things, right? I'm thinking about how do I make the next Wikipedia entry. I'm thinking about what do I need to add outside of the Tolbrand Peninsula proper so that I have good connections to everything. I've added another railroad, like I mentioned last time, and I'm probably going to add at least one more. And these are going to be railroads, again, that are fully outside the peninsula that we will never see unless somebody reskins something for them and I decide to use it. That is the kind of thing where, then we would see them. Then we would see them over here. But we would never see the railroad itself. Never would I be building track work for it. I could, hypothetically, if I really wanted to go that far, but I don't. See, in future days, when I have Tolbrand done, what a joke, then, hypothetically, I could go on and build more, like I said. Whether that would actually be an alternate history version, or a different time version, or even just an extended version where we just add more towns, that would probably be the easiest thing to do. Add more towns, add more rail. We build all the way north to Jefferson, which is like only 15 miles or so north of Olive, so it wouldn't be that far. That would be the next big step. And then, I don't know what's south yet. I'm getting there. I know that there's going to be a pretty hefty barge operation in Wombeck. And then, what else have I got? Obviously there's the stuff running east. That'd be, formerly Sayre Pass, but that would no longer be that. Currently, there's the Zion and Skyline, which, if I were to feel like building another couple 100 miles of railroad, then I would eventually wind up in Akron, and that would be the next major hub or division point. The thing is, we only have one Gilson City-sized city planned, and Akron would probably give it a run for its money. It might not be as big because it's not a port town, but it would be pretty sizable. It would be pretty darn big. It would probably have a lot of sprawl going on too, and especially suburban sprawl, because this is the 50s, they're pumping out subdivisions like there's no tomorrow, and being in the middle of a fairly large and fertile river valley, and by fairly large, I mean like 50 to 100 miles across large. It ain't got nothing on the Mississippi and the Great Plains, but it's big. And so that means that I would be working in a very different kind of town. Almost everything, Gilson City included, is fairly cramped. Bellington, when we get there, is going to be the first real farm town we're going to be in. And that is, it's small. It's not cramped by any means, because it's surrounded by endless fields in pretty much every direction. But it is small. It is a farmer's town. It's a farm town. It survives off of grain and barley exports, that sort of thing. Relatively simple crop exports. And really that's it. There isn't much else going on there. I don't think anybody was under the illusion that there would be more going on there. Maybe I'll toss another couple of things in. Maybe some other stuff that's produce related. An orchard or whatever, and I may have a couple of, maybe one or two little spur lines that go out towards the fields. for more direct access to some of these larger farms. But the thing is, it's going to be largely isolated. There was effectively nothing that holds it to where, there's no major railroad intersection, there's no major railroad infrastructure even, there's just the line that goes through, and then the branch line, which is the mountain branch, or the formerly mountain division, or rather attempted mountain division of the Gilson Eastern. As I've talked about that before, it was their failed project to build over the mountains. They decided to start from Bellington. They got up there and, well, I'll just say they tried. They gave up fairly quickly. Not necessarily because they were encountering stiff opposition, but because they ran into the VMR and decided, well, why don't we just talk to them about something? It did shorten up the route considerably, and there are a number of transfer freights. One is a number of transfer freights that head up that branch line, up the mountain branch, and then effectively terminate on Gilson Eastern in the town of, I think it's Appleton. It's TJ's town. I'm going to be stealing it, or at least stealing the idea of it. And basically just get passed off to Volga Mountain Railroad, the Volga Mountain Railroad, and then sent on up. So those exist. They do. They aren't the most prominent things in the world, but because, frankly, if you're going west from Gilson City, what you do is you go on the VMR, or sorry, east. If you're going east from Gilson City, what you do is you go on the VMR. VMR, again. ZNS, the Zion and Skyline. They have a direct route to the west. And they don't even have to go over anybody else's rails. There are no handoffs. It is fairly high speed, relatively speaking, for a mountain railroad. And yeah, and they can take it right from Gilson City. It is the kind of thing where you think about the deals that have been made in the peninsula between railroads, and it's fairly obvious which ones are just two railroads just trying to figure out a way to beat the third railroad, which clearly has the upper hand. Now, people have been trying to beat out the Zion and Skyline ever since they bought out the Akron-Macon Railroad, and they've failed basically every time. This is no exception. The quantity of goods that goes through via that method is, well, it's less than exciting. There are certainly a couple of things that will go that way, but how much? Not much. That's why I said one is a number. That was sort of my correction to myself. The other thing is, when I'm even planning that, it's difficult for me to think about, well, these trains are going to go this way because, blah, blah, blah. It's many different facets that have to happen, or that have to coincide in my head at the moment that I'm figuring out where cargo goes from point A to point B. And as for the most part, almost everything we're going to be using is either generated or consumed on Tolbrand. It's kind of difficult for me to justify, in a lot of cases, cargo that appears on one end of the map and goes to the other end of the map. It complicates my work quite a bit, and, well, obviously we're really not there yet. If we have holes in the schedule where we can put through freight, or even trains that I feel like are too short, that's when I'm going to pile on the extra cars and say, okay, well, you're actually going to switch out an extra 10 cars that are just freight that is passing through from south of Wambach, which, oh right, I do have a name for the town south of Wambach now, that's New DMAG. And, from there, then it's just going to pass through Gilson City all the way up to Jefferson and beyond. So, I may have some of those, or at least I probably will have some of those cargoes that are just transient cargoes. They're just passing on through. But for the most part, almost everything we're doing is going to be either produced or consumed in Tolbrent, or both. I do need to remember that I have the ability to send stuff off map, though. Certainly with regard to our lumber situation, where we just have too gosh darn much of it. Yeah, I did manage to get 40 carloads out via the TUFC train. But that's the kind of thing where I haven't even programmed that yet, so looking at how it's going to be is a little bit difficult. I haven't even figured out how to sort those cars out. So that's going to be interesting to do. And I think I just cracked it. I think I did. But I haven't sat down to check if it works yet. Partly because that takes a lot of time, and also partly because that takes a lot of time. So, let's see, hold on. We have a gap of the trees here. That is intentional. Or a gap in the grass, which indicates a gap in the trees. There we go. Uh-oh. There we go. So move all these trees back just a little bit for us to get in here with our other textures and such. Let me drink some water. So, okay. Anyway, back to what we were doing. Got slightly distracted there. And the game is frozen. Every time we open this tab, I don't know what it is with the textures specifically. I don't know. This feels much less open than it was, and I'm not sure if I like or dislike that. There are certainly going to be a couple of areas where it's very much appropriate that it feels like we're hanging on to the edge of a cliff. I mean, it ain't Cumbre's Pass, but it's something. Alright. So up to there, just about. Let's see, are there any areas? So we can actually see over the trees a little bit here, and I don't know about right here. We haven't put that in yet, but I'm sure we'll get to it. Alright, we also need to do this while we're here. And while we have this texture out, because apparently the switching of textures is problematic. Not just the trees, the textures too. So we'll do that. I will also do it on this side, because this is... I mean, it's not the steepest thing in the world, but it's steep enough that I feel like it warrants some rocks. And we will get some dirt in there as well. Grab this forest floor darker, and we're going to be using this all along the edge here as we do. Once again, just maintaining the same textures, the same relative patterns. It's this kind of thing that will... I mean, yeah, it's a little boring, certainly. But it's this kind of thing that will let you get through some pretty big areas of your route without too much hassle. As long as you as long as you have a couple of things that are your staples that you stick to, this is going to be the bulk of your railroad. Most railroads don't change scenery appearance every couple of miles. And that is a problem for a lot of people, because you have something that you work on, and you maybe get a little ways with it, and then you start again, and you just sort of, or then you leave it and come back to it, and you just sort of start again. Or you decide that, well, maybe I can do this a little bit better. If you make sure that you know what you're doing, you know what you're putting down, then it's basically it turns into a Zen thing. You don't really have to think. You just have to place, your 1 or 2 or 3 textures and your couple of splines. And that is that. And there we go. We basically have we have an area that I just pasted trees onto a week ago. We've come back to it, and in an hour and 15 minutes or so, we've made it look pretty good, or at least passable. If I had criticisms, I'd say that maybe the texture choice is a little bit uninspired, although this texture is pretty cool, and the fact that it works as well as it does is kind of a godsend, honestly. It doesn't offer the scenic views that you might hope, but, well, there are trees here. What are you going to do about it? I could chop some of them down or make them all baby trees or something like that, but doing a young forest, at least to some extent, is fairly difficult in Tane. And on top of that, just doing an area without forest, for me, is somewhat difficult. Because I'm just so used to it, I don't know what to do to fill in the space. Hence why we have sort of left the oceanside area alone for now, and we'll maybe come back to it later. I know that it's going to involve plenty of pasting, or not pasting, but putting down the same spline over and over again, now that I've settled on a spline. As if this is any different, but at least it has a little bit of variation in terms of terrain. I also got a little bit lightheaded at the end of that sentence there. I am so glad that it's Friday, because this work week has been brutal. Anyway, so let's get all this stuff in, and then we can't, but you can drive a train through here. I am pretty forthcoming with the route CDP. If you ask me on Discord, I will almost definitely give it to you. At the very least, I try to make a regular event of, if I feel I need to back it up, or certainly if somebody asks for it, I put the link to the drive folder where the CDP is in our group for trains, route building for all to see. So if you want to play around on Tolbrand, you are fully free to. And of course, there is the old version, which is, I believe, 0.2.2 maybe it is, on the download station. The thing that I am hung up on right now, or the thing that came to me before I started recording, was what am I going to do when I finish this section? And I don't mean, like, what section of the route am I going to do, etc. I know what section is next. I may sort of try to get public opinion when that comes around, so don't worry about talking about it now, although if you do post a comment about it, of course, I'll read it and respond to it. The whole thing with the next, or what to do with when I'm done with it, has mostly to do with AI. Because the AI for this section, when I put up the original thing, I don't think there was any AI. And now the AI for this section exists in a form, but it is not perfect by any means. In fact, it's fairly rudimentary. It doesn't do a lot. It does some things, but it doesn't go as far as you might hope. For example, and I keep coming back to it, the trailer on flat car train does not unload itself. It just sort of rolls up, it grabs 10 cars, or 8 cars, and goes and sits there in front of the loading dock, just sort of waiting for the next command that will never come. So I do have to program that. I just don't feel like it. It is a lot of work to do something like that, and moreover, it is a lot of work and then a lot of waiting. Because, well, you program it, and then you have to wait for the whole thing to run through its cycle before you actually get to see if it worked or not. And you could always program it on the fly during a cycle and see if it works, but then you have to keep an exact record of what you programmed. And then write it down and then copy it over. So, it's doable. It's not really easy by any means, and it doesn't really make things easier. For those with oodles of patience, there really isn't much of a concern over whether a given thing is the kind of thing you should put in during the session or after the session. For them, which, I mean, I've sort of included, although I just don't feel like it right now, the answer is everything. Everything should be put in after the session. You shouldn't be putting stuff in during the session. You shouldn't be putting commands in during the session. Unless you are fully prepared to figure it out a second time. And you are just experimenting. Which, I mean, I've done that plenty. Because when I've had troubleshooting issues, I've just sort of gone in and let it play to get up to the point where there is an issue. And then once I'm at that point, then tried to figure out what the issue is. Instead of watching it, troubleshooting it, trying a solution by programming it, and then running it again to see if it works. When you're doing quick on-the-fly stuff like that, where the answer is almost certainly going to make a major impact on your decision-making process, henceforth, then I think it's absolutely free to let that fly during just a normal simulation. Especially if you're coming to the end of a simulation, or at least your end of a usefulness for a simulation, and you won't get anything more out of letting it run more. That's the thing that I'm worried about, is if I start messing with commands, particularly if it's a train that ends its schedule and there are still plenty of other things going on, am I going to get into a situation where something I did then affects one of the other trains and causes me to think that that one is bugging out, when really it was my fault and it would have worked fine otherwise? That can still be helpful information, but it's not the kind of thing you want to induce. The thing that I can't recommend enough is having a test world where you just test sort of typical problems and solutions. I think that I'm going to have to whip out my test world and do an AI test with regard to helper engines and stuff like that. I also need to figure out some of the other stuff, particularly for the Geiger Mountains Railroad. I think that's going to remain dormant for the time being. I don't know if I'm going to make it dead last in the priority list, as in I'm going to build all of Tolbrand before I come back to the narrow gauge, but I do know that it is pretty low down on the priority list. As for priorities, for those who are curious, the next section after this, because I didn't mention it, the next section after this is going to be from here to Bellington. And that is going to be another 15 miles of Gilson Eastern Railroad, which means it gives me a lot more space to set up trains that are coming through in the morning in that direction. It also gives me more space to just have those trains programmed instead of running off the end of the map after about 20 minutes. So, that's the kind of thing I'm looking forward to doing, even though it is going to be, again, I'll be stepping out of my comfort zone because a lot of it's going to be farmland, and I'm not good at that. Whoops, again. If the areas that I'm working on are not proof enough, it is absolutely going to be troublesome for me to figure out what to do. Once we finish up with the mountainous stuff and we go back to finishing the stuff on the coast, I think there's going to be a lot more experimenting for me and learning what looks good and what doesn't look good. On the face of it, farms are a fairly simple formula. You just put up some walls or some fences, you get down maybe some irrigation ditches if you're going to go above and beyond with the scenery detail, but then you just put down crops and call it a day. But what crops, what orientation, what about the farm buildings? There are 100 questions that you can ask on the back of that. And these are questions that you might not necessarily care about as a casual observer riding along on a train. But they're questions that I care about because I go above and beyond for no reason, but mostly because I hate myself. And, I don't mean to say I go above and beyond as like yeah, look at me, I'm so awesome, although I assume by this point in watching me you know that that isn't my feeling. I say go above and beyond as in, I really want to go the extra mile. I really want to see it totally fleshed out as much as it can be. I don't think that, I think I need to get rid of some trees in here. I don't think that, oh, god damn that that well enough is well enough, basically. I know that in every corner of every route I have to pay attention in some way, shape, or form. Why? I don't know. I just know. Every corner of every tile, I should say. Which is why we're doing so much work along the sides of roadways and rivers that are well out of sight of the railroad. I mean, on top of that, it does end up looking weird in map view, and that's one reason, one minor reason to consider doing something like I do. But again, by and large, these are areas that nobody's going to look at. At least nobody's going to look at very closely. I think that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, and if I wanted to make Tolbrand, I don't think anyone would have gotten upset with me if I had gone with a 2-tile or 1-tile wide mega route akin to the UMR. Especially with the AI work and stuff like that, I feel like the route can certainly stand on its own, irrespective of good scenery. That said, I would like to have scenery. You know, you have that, like, triangle where your dot is, like, trending towards operations, or track work, or scenery, or something like that. I don't know what necessarily the 3 points would be. I want it dead in the center, and I want the dot big enough that it covers the whole thing. I want to get all those things done. Now, obviously, I'm not going to be perfect with the scenery. I've talked about that many times before. There are a number of people in the group that are far better at scenery than I. One of them being Mason, another one being Jader. Even Milky is doing pretty good at it. And I'm not saying that as a subtle diss to Milky, but Milky was never the hyper detailer. He was always sort of on the almost on my side with the we're going to build a route as big as possible. But Jader, the other person I neglected to mention is TJ for certain, and then Kevon to an extent. I don't actually know Kevon's level of detail, but Milky is currently doing a lot of work, and a lot of it is very, very good work. So I've got nothing but praise for him at this point, not that I really derided him before. There was a day and age where Milky track work was a saying, but that day has passed. We all get better. If you ever think that you're garbage at making routes, even if you are, you can get better. We all will. No, but in all honesty, it's the kind of thing where we're all garbage at some point. I mean, I have my garbage posted on the internet for the world to see, and I get comments about it fairly frequently. Mostly just casual ribbing. But certainly people do say things about my god-awful creations of yore. But even if you make something that you never finish, or never even get close to finish, you learn something. And maybe part of what you learn is to bite off smaller projects, bite off smaller pieces. But that's not really what matters. What matters is if you're enjoying yourself, unless you're doing it on commission, in which case that's a totally different ballgame. But what matters is that you're enjoying yourself and that you're happy with the product. Now, I'm always a huge advocate for never ditch a route. And that's, obviously, I'm kind of a hypocrite. But the Tamara's Vale and Anaconda had many, many, many problems with it. And it was the kind of thing where I went, I don't know about this. I think I'm going to just try again. But also it was sidelined because a bigger project came up, and that was the Iron Horseman Chronicles. And then I let that slide by the wayside because everything that needed to be done on the Iron Horseman Chronicles, or on the Iron Horseman Railroad, was effectively done. Now Milky has taken it and is updating it for Trains 2019, and I'm wondering what that's going to look like at the end of it. I think gorgeous. And hopefully we get plenty of use out of it. But at the end of the day, what's important is that he has a product that he likes. Even if it is the Iron Horseman route and it's supposed to be used for filming the Iron Horseman, even if it never gets filmed on, which I doubt that occurrence, but even if for some reason it does never get filmed on, if he's happy with what it looks like at the end of the day, then he's succeeded as far as I'm concerned. And based on first impressions of the work that's been done on it, I'm going to be happy with what it looks like too. That's why I say it's one of the major reasons why I bring up Milky's rising prowess with route construction. Let's move that over there. Mostly scenicking, because there really isn't much to do on the Horseman route in terms of route construction. It's done almost. There are a few areas where it still does need terrain work. There are a few areas where it probably needs to be torn down and rebuilt, but it's mostly finished. So let's fill in this here. I like this texture. I've really... Oh, wait a minute. We didn't check on it. We didn't check it. Manage content. We're going to have to swap it out with something if it doesn't work. Also, uh-oh. Pine Hill Grass. The game is freaking out. Oh, good. It is installed from the download station. So, alright, back to what we were doing here. So, I don't really know about what is... I mean, I have my route building philosophy. Everyone has their own. Mason. I've spoken at length about my thoughts on Mason and his building ability. I wish more than anything Mason, he absolutely follows my doctrine of never give up on a route, but I wish he filled in those spaces between all the beautiful scenic portions. If he were to ever settle for something less than absolute beauty, then he could probably have those areas filled in, because they're all fairly empty and flat. But mainly what happens is he gets an idea for a screenshot that he wants, and then he builds that diorama attached to his route somewhere. And I've watched him go, do some forays into AI and stuff like that, and it's been very entertaining to watch because he is a veteran Factorio player, and so similar to my feeling, it's this sort of like, oh, let's solve a problem, and it makes you feel good inside when it works. I wish I could show everybody the videos that I have of Gilson Eastern Railroad number whatever it is, I think 12, switching out the forestry at the end of at the end of the Olive Branch. I can't show everyone because honestly it's really boring, but I actually, you know what I should do? I should make a time lapse of that and just have that happen. It wouldn't be that hard to do, I don't think. I would just set the camera there for a few hours and watch it do its thing. I should do that. That wouldn't be hard to do. So we've got this Horseshoe Valley, or whatever you want to call it. Let me see. I'm curious about something. Actually, these two should be fairly... Let's see. So, this is a height of 68. This is a height of 57. Okay, so this is 30 feet higher than that. I was just looking at this going, this giant lake's over here and this valley's over here. What are the odds that it would have busted through in some way, shape, or form ages ago? Oh, also, it's copy-pasting time, but I don't think we have much to copy-paste. We're sort of doing a pretty good job getting this area patched up over here, although this needs to be patched up. And along this coastline needs to be looked at, too. I have not been paying attention to my 30-minute limit on a given section this time. We've just sort of been droning on and on and on. But yeah. So, on the docket. Now, at the beginning of the year, I was like, oh, maybe I can finish this section and the next one and the next one this year. It is September, and I am nowhere close to finishing this section. So, clearly that was a bust. But that's okay, because I've had bigger busts before. So, you know, if I had worked as hard as, well, somebody working a full-time job or somebody working a commission on one of these things, then, yeah, I'm sure much more would have been done. But working 2 hours a week on something, at least it's consistent. Slow and steady, you know? Slow and steady eventually gives up and doesn't have much to show for it. But we're not going to worry about that part, will we now? Yeah, so this section is soon TM going to be done. And, of course, you can see how much we have left to do on it, and you can see the progress that we make on it, and it feels like I'm Kurt J. Mack over here just walking to the far lands, but I am getting stuff done. And it is, right now, fairly pivotal stuff. It is, you know, it took me 2 episodes to do what is effectively a very large section of land that needed to get done. This will wait. I'm going to avoid copy-pasting on this episode. So, we got everything in here done, so that means we're effectively up to, I mean, almost here. Which, if you think about it, that's a pretty, you know, for 4 hours of work, that's a lot of distance that we did. I need to grab the correct grass for this, but right now, we can sit back and think about what we did in 3.5 hours. Because last episode was mostly placing down the grass to get ready for this. And yeah, we've done the terrain already, but that's the terrain. That's in a different category altogether. You know, last episode we spent placing down a lot of the grass for this, and this episode, or you know, and also placing the trees, I might add. That's also fairly important. And this episode, we came in and we did the extra fixins, the other stuff that needed to be done. So, this is the kind of thing where I am impressed with what I managed to do, even though it doesn't feel like we did that much stuff. We did get plenty done. I'm looking fondly on the work that we've done. I don't want to be too critical of myself at this point in time. Now, if you guys have something that you want me to show specifically, you know, if you want me to work on a specific part of the route, you can say so in the comments, and I will. I'm beholden to you guys more than anything. If you want to see something, I'll make it happen. Or, you know, specific work done. If you want to have something explained to you, I'm still thinking about doing Tutorial Tuesdays. If you have something that you want to learn, I may do it. If I start programming Jader's Art, it's going to be done on Tutorial Tuesdays, and it's maybe going to be done in stream form. I don't even necessarily know, oh wait, that's why. I was about to say, I don't even necessarily know why I don't do this in stream, and the reason is the zombie train. So, when that wraps up, I may in a way, or in a not insignificant way, move this to streaming, or maybe a stream would be on Tuesday and this would be on Thursday. You know, doing live comments and taking comments that people have thought up and put in the comments section, that's a horse of a different color. It's a completely different ball game, and other analogies that I could come up with. I don't know. I like taking comments just directly on YouTube, as in, you know, somebody posts about it. And also, if I'm doing a Tutorial Tuesdays or something like that, I would probably be less responsive to somebody saying, hey, can you work on this section right here? Because if I am doing something, then I'm doing something. Although I don't know why, actually, it would be that different. In fact, I might even be more responsive, because then you know the person is right there to watch. They're interested in what you're doing. They want you to see. They want to see you do this specific thing. Yeah, why would I not do it? But I could always just say, hold on, I'm doing, I'm working on whatever I'm working on. The thing is with the comments is I can look at them ahead of time and think, okay, I've got to do that, that, and that. Even though most of the time, the first time I'm looking at them is on the air. Occasionally I'll see one ahead of time because it'll pop up on my phone or whatever when somebody posts it. There are ways for me to find your comments ahead of time, of course. So, there we go. Alright, so check on the time one more time. We've got about 20 minutes. This would be the part where I'm frantically copy-pasting trees, but that isn't what is not what we're doing this time around. And I think I'm going to stick to mostly this grass for areas that aren't the railroad track, partly to cut down on the number of splines in this area, but also partly just to save myself the effort. I do want a couple more of those brick culverts under here. And maybe I will pay attention to the other kinds of grass, just in the areas where it's obvious that you'd be able to see the railroad tracks. If you guys are playing around with Tollbrand and you find errors or issues or whatever, whether that be with the AI or, you find some area that's severely lacking detail or whatever, and, I missed something, feel free to speak up, because that is another incentive for me to go work on that specific area. Alright, so let's continue up this way. Yep, grab this again. We want the underground texture, which is seasonal. Seasonal forest texture. Never seen it do anything seasonal, but it is what it is. I don't necessarily care about it being seasonal. So we're going to go right up to the edge of where we're doing stuff here, which is right there. And hopefully we don't cover it over with more tree copy pasting in the near future. But right now what we have to do is secure the edges of all of these roads. This being one of them. This being one of them, although honestly I could probably get rid of this. Maybe I could just put a house out here or something. Maybe a cabin. Let's see what we've got for cabins. Cabin. Not a signal cabin. Oh my god, I hear banjos. Also, hold on. That's too funny. Okay, so we've got a cabin out there. There's now a purpose for that road. Oh, that's Rollins. Way past the Yukon cabins. Maybe we'll add another one out here. It'll be almost like another campsite, but not quite. And maybe we could add something out back, maybe like a chicken coop or something. But that's an issue for another time, maybe. So we have a couple cabins out there. I wanted to either make a purpose for that road or get rid of it, because seriously, it's just such a weird thing. Okay, so let's see, we've got about 15 minutes. How much grass can we put down in 15 minutes? Let's just do that real quick. That out of the way. Oh, so it is actually a different grass spline. I wasn't sure. They kind of all look the same. I know, I'm racist. Get over it. Or don't. Up to you. Listen, it's not my fault that all grass splines look the same. They just do, okay? Alright, so if we get in the edge of this road here, all the way around, all the way to the edge of the map, that means we can tree all the way from here to basically this line without any consequences whatsoever. Actually, beyond that, we can go to almost here, although there is not the shrubs on that, so we can get pretty close to that, though. So that's a lot of work. So let's just throw all this down and just call it a day, and maybe throw some trees down. Now that we're in the last 15 of the show, we can afford a crash, I think. Although it doesn't really matter when I start putting the trees down, the crashes just come. It just happens. It's not like I start the timer when I start placing trees. I just do it in the last 30 minutes of the episode to make sure that if it does crashes, or if it does crash, or when it does crash, I don't lose too much footage. I'm much more concerned about the footage, because if it crashes when I'm copy-pasting trees, I'm probably not losing that much work. At the very least, I'm not losing that much effort. There's a reason that the copy-pasting is my preferred method. Copy pasta. So we don't really need to be doing all this. At least we certainly don't need to be making it this thick. I'm like making 4 and 5 thick layers of grass here, when honestly, I can probably get away with 2 or 3, and I could even get away with it looking sort of tiled. Because who's going to be looking over here once again? I've always toyed with the idea of just invisible tracking every single road so that you can drive, like, the beat truck down it or something. Still might do that. It would be a little bit nightmarish, but I still might do it. It'd be sort of the last resort thing. Or, you know, the painful sheer boredom, what do I do now? Instead of building more to the map, I decide to go back and make it so you can drive the whole map. Yeah, that makes sense. That's the mark of a completely sane individual. Insert the picture of the rabid-looking Batman shouting, "I'm a model of mental health." So that's where I'm at right about now. That's what Tolbrand does to you. But really, not quite. Tolbrand has never been nearly as stressful to me as many other projects have been to many other people, and that means I get to shout out Martin from Wintergatan on his Marble Machine. Once again, he has done some incredible things. In the past week, he's put out another video, as he always does, on Wednesday, my dudes. And yeah, it makes me happy to see that project come to life. I am giddy. I am going to be so seeing it in concert if it gets to tour. Hopefully it will, because that's the design goal of the Marble Machine X. I love Wintergatan. I love their music. I love their tech. It's so good. It's so good. Alright, yeah, we're definitely going overboard on the grass here. There's the banjos. Paddle faster. Yeah, I'm going to give these guys some room in the back. Just to, you know, again, maybe I'll throw down like a chicken coop or something. You think if they're out here, they could use some sustainable food, but also it could just act as like a hunting cabin, and they get all their food from the woods, if you catch my drift. Venison. Maybe I could make it like a little smoker in the back then instead. Make some venison jerky or something. Alright. Alright, so we did that. Are we going to do the copy pasting? I guess we are, because we got to fill in that little space, as well as everything else. So, give me this block of trees here, and then let's go over to the little gap that's missing here. Boop. There we go, that's filled in. Mission accomplished. Alright, let's go home. We're done, guys. I am going to follow along the edge of the railroad here as much as I can for now. And my one takeaway right now is maybe I should be pushing these shrubs much closer to the edge of forest. It just seems like they're not far enough. You know, it seems like they're too difficult to notice, almost. And I want them to be very present. Alright, so we're going to leave it there because that's where I stopped doing the whatchamacallit. Wow, I'm really fading for whatever reason. That's where I stopped doing the shrubs. The almighty shrub spline. Alright, so there, and then there. I try to make sure that my, I'm spinning this copy-paste, and it is, I think, perfectly square, so that's good. But I'm trying not to tile it too much, because it still will look kind of poor from the satellite camera. Looking at the hole in the satellite picture. Yeah, I'm running out of battery right now. Like I said, it's been a taxing week. There's a reason I didn't do this on time. But I'm glad I'm doing it because this is one of the more important things I have to do on a weekly basis. At least for me it is, because if I fall behind, that is 2 hours that I'm not getting back in terms of working on Tolbrand. I have a lot of grand plans for this route. AI and not AI all lumped into one. Just grand plans. And so any time that I do get to work on it, or do choose to work on it, is basically a good thing for me. It's the kind of thing where I curse my misfortune for having planned such a thing, but at the end of the day, I'm very glad to be building this. I'm very glad to have the following that I do while I'm building this. I'm glad to respond to your questions and your comments. I'm glad to be able to use it as a sort of catalyst for a lot of my latest writing adventures, because I haven't been able to design this kind of world, really. It's completely divorced from reality in a handful of senses. It's just a loosely US 50s based thing. There's no particular location. There are no particular political pressures that we're talking about. It's not the TAHC universe where we have, the looming threat of McCarthyism. It's the 50s, and we've got, nuclear war, possibly on the horizon. We're dealing with the Soviet Union, or whatever. We're dealing with the equivalent. Where it's based on what is ostensibly a real Earth. Whereas here, there are no such lies being peddled. This is a 50s-esque scenario, and we have areas that look like they belong in Maine, areas that look like they belong in Colorado, areas that look like they belong in, Southern California. And that's sort of areas that I'm thinking of doing, not necessarily areas that are already done. But I'm sure you understood what I was saying in that regard. We're really packing it in here. We're really packing stuff together. And I think, or rather, I'm very thankful for the fact that I'm able to do this. Of course, that, it really has more to do with my own free will than anything, but being, having people to discuss it with and having people that will look at it with me, that sort of thing, it's invaluable, because it makes me feel like there's a reason for me to keep working on it. A lot of people, I feel like they lose their way, not just because they feel like they get tired or burned out with their route, but they feel like, what's the point? You know, especially if they're not having immediate gratifying fun with their route construction, it's very easy to fall back into the, well, whatever, I'll just leave this, maybe I'll come back to it in the future. Whereas something like this, where I come here and I sit down every week, and I sit down for 2 hours and I do it, and then I put it online and I look at people looking at it and making comments about it, and that is a highlight. And it happens every week. And so that means every week I get to sit back and say, well, this is why I'm doing it. I'm doing it for you guys. Even if I don't feel like it. And honestly, the last few weeks I've kind of felt like it. A lot of me has been wanting to do more AI work, and that just takes time that I don't have right now. But for the most part, I have been really looking forward to this, because I feel like we've had a bit of a breakthrough now. And we're doing, we're working on some stuff that is going by a lot quicker in terms of just space finished per time put in, compared to a lot of other stuff, a lot of other areas that we've been working on. And now, would you look at that? Like, we filled in this whole area. Now I wouldn't exactly call it a feat, because we did have a lot of it filled in already. But we got enough foundation done that we could sort of move on from the area that we were in. And since I've got a few more minutes, let me do some texturing here. Just so that we mark our road through the woods. We're going to mark our territory. I'm a dog, I'm just going to pee on it. And this will be a little bit slow going, but it is what it is. And honestly, I might just leave this exactly the way it is. This road here doesn't need to do anything different than what it's doing right now. Because who is going to look over here? We are, we're gaining on a mile from the nearest track. You can't even see it. You can see it on the map, and that's why I'm doing this texture strip. But it's mainly for me to look at and go, okay, there are roads going off in that direction and that direction. Okay, so I need to pay attention to that. If I ever build something on the other side of it, I need to pay attention to where the roads are. Because I don't want a major road to disappear into a section that doesn't have tile work, that effectively doesn't exist, and never come out the other side. I wouldn't necessarily call this a major road, but it's a road. It's not about to dead end. There are a few, this is one of the few smaller roads that people can take through the Volga Mountains. Boop. Heading north to south. And this is the only one in the area. We've got that one there and that one there. And then the next one would probably be up here, even. So let's also do it underneath this road here. It's going to be a lot tighter a radius. Banjo. I'm going to really want to finish this area as quickly as I can and then get the hell out. I'm not going to do it today, but I will do it. That's probably going to be one of the top priorities next time. And also, if we still have time when I'm done bringing this to the main road, maybe there's one more thing we can do. I'm saying that like it's going to be exciting, so I'm keeping it from you. It's not. It's a little bit more tree pasting. See? Pasta does grow on trees. Alright, so give me this. Nope, actually give me this. Give me this. Let's go over here. You, right here. This little spit of non-treed area, we need to fill that in. Show me the terrain. There we go. Show me the rest of the grass. There we go. Again. Okay, there we go. That was the important thing. And I'm amazed it hasn't crashed yet. Which means I should really play between now and Thursday, because if I don't, it's probably going to crash during next episode. That's just what happens. Alright, get all these trees off the road also. That's something else we can do while we're here. We came through and we did all this copy pasting last time and then did none of the requisite, tidying up afterward. This area is starting to look pretty good, though. We're getting there. And then on this side, well, we need to figure out what goes in. I mean, this section's probably going to be forest. Because what else would go here? But most of the lands, I feel like, are going to end up just being this grass. Because this area probably isn't quite fertile enough for real farmland, so it's just got to be grazing land. If I was really thinking, what I would do is I would have a cattle passage under here. In fact, I might do that. It's not a bad idea. And then just fence in that area. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. I need to find something like that. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this video. This is the Admiral, signing off.